I'd stayed late again, not because anyone asked me to, but because going home to my empty apartment felt harder than staying in this beautiful space filled with other people's visions of beauty. The last painting I'd hung that afternoon, a massive abstract in blues and grays, seemed to pulse in the dim security lighting, and I stood there for a moment, my coat half on, just looking at it. Sometimes I wondered if the artists knew how lucky they were, to take everything churning inside them and make it into something people could see. Something external. Something that didn't have to live only in the space behind your ribs where it ached and never resolved. My phone buzzed. A text from Samantha. Still there? Go home, Riley. The art will be here tomorrow. I smiled despite myself. Samantha Chun was the gallery owner, my boss for the past 3 years, and the reason I'd learned to love this work in the first place. She had a way of seeing things, not just art but people, that made you feel understood in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. She was 15 years older than me, confident in a way I'd never managed to be, beautiful in that effortless way some women have where they don't seem to be trying at all but somehow always look perfect. And she was kind. That was the thing that had undone me slowly over the years. The kindness that showed up in unexpected moments, in texts like this one, in the way she remembered how I took my coffee, in how she'd noticed when I'd stopped eating lunch and started bringing me soup from the place down the street without saying anything about it. I texted back, leaving now. See you tomorrow. The truth was more complicated than I could fit into a text message. The truth was that I'd been in love with Samantha for 2 years, maybe longer, and that loving her had become like breathing, necessary and constant and something I barely noticed anymore except in those moments when it hurt so much I couldn't ignore it. She didn't know. I'd made sure of that. She was my boss, and she was straight as far as I knew, and I needed this job and this place and the small corner of her world I occupied. I couldn't risk losing it all by wanting more. Outside, the rain had intensified into a downpour. I pulled my hood up and ran for the subway, my shoes soaking through immediately. By the time I made it home, I was drenched and shivering, and my apartment felt even emptier than usual. I peeled off my wet clothes, took a hot shower, and climbed into bed with a book I'd been trying to read for weeks. But the words wouldn't stick. They never did anymore. I kept thinking about Samantha's text, about the casual way she worried about me, about how tomorrow I'd see her again and feel that same pull of wanting and not having that had become the background music of my life. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams I wouldn't remember in the morning. The new client came in on a Thursday morning when the gallery was unusually quiet. I was at the front desk, updating our social media accounts, when the door chimed and she walked in like she owned the place. Tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that took in everything with a kind of assessment that made you feel both scrutinized and admired at the same time. She wore a perfectly tailored suit in charcoal gray, and when she smiled at me, it was the kind of smile that knew exactly what effect it had. "Good morning," she said, her voice low and warm. "I'm looking for Samantha. Is she available?" "She's in her office. Can I tell her who's asking?" "Victoria Hartwell. I have an appointment." I recognized the name. Victoria Hartwell owned 3 restaurants in the city and was apparently looking to commission several large pieces for her new location in the financial district. It was the kind of client Samantha had been courting for months, the kind that could mean a significant boost to the gallery's profile. I nodded and picked up the phone to let Samantha know, trying to ignore the way Victoria was still looking at me, her gaze steady and interested in a way that made my skin warm. Samantha emerged from her office moments later, perfectly professional in a cream blouse and dark slacks, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. She greeted Victoria with the easy charm she brought to all her client interactions, but I noticed something shift in her expression when Victoria turned that same appraising smile on her. Something tightened around her eyes. They disappeared into her office, and I went back to my work, trying not to wonder what they were talking about, trying not to care that Victoria Hartwell was exactly the kind of woman Samantha would probably find interesting, successful, confident, obviously wealthy. The kind of woman who belonged in Samantha's world in a way I never would. An hour later, they emerged together, Samantha looking pleased but distant, Victoria looking like someone who'd just won something. And then Victoria stopped at my desk, leaning against it in a way that felt deliberately casual. "I didn't catch your name," she said. "Riley." "Riley. That's lovely. Tell me, Riley, are you an artist yourself, or do you just work with them?" "I studied art history in college, but I'm not particularly talented at making it. I'm better at helping other people show theirs." "I find that hard to believe." Her smile widened. You have an artist's eyes. Very observant. Very perceptive. I felt my face heat and hated myself for it. Behind Victoria, I could see Samantha standing very still, her expression unreadable. Thank you, I managed. That's kind of you to say. Victoria pulled out a business card, one of the expensive heavy stock ones that successful people carry, and wrote something on the back of it. This is my personal number. If you're ever interested in discussing art, or anything else over dinner, I'd love to hear more about what you think makes good work good. She placed the card on the desk in front of me with a smile that made it clear dinner wasn't really about discussing art, then turned back to Samantha. I'll be in touch about those pieces. Thank you for your time. After she left, the gallery felt very quiet. I looked at the card, then at Samantha, who was standing with her arms crossed, staring at the door. That was interesting, I said carefully. Samantha's jaw tightened. She's a serious client, Riley. This could be a very important commission for us. I know. That's great. So maybe don't encourage her to think about anything other than the art. The words landed like a slap, unexpected and sharp. I stared at Samantha, trying to understand the edge in her voice. I wasn't encouraging anything. I was just being polite. You were being more than polite. You were flirting back. I wasn't, I stopped, genuinely confused. Samantha, I was literally just answering her questions. She turned away, her shoulders tight with tension I didn't understand. Forget it. Just be professional, okay? I'm going back to my office. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at Victoria's card, my chest tight with something that felt like hurt and confusion tangled together. In 3 years of working for Samantha, she'd never spoken to me like that. Never been anything but kind and warm and encouraging. I didn't understand what had just happened, didn't understand why she seemed angry with me for something I hadn't even done. I threw the card in the trash and went back to work, but the rest of the day felt wrong, the easy rhythm Samantha and I usually shared replaced by something stiff and uncomfortable. She stayed in her office for most of the afternoon, and when she did come out, she barely looked at me. By the time I left that evening, I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the actual work I'd done. I felt like I'd lost something without knowing what it was or how to get it back. The weekend passed in a blur of bad television and too much time in my own head. I kept replaying that moment with Victoria, trying to see what Samantha had seen, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. But I couldn't find it. I'd been polite. Maybe I'd smiled too much, but that was just how I was with people. I wasn't good at being cold or distant. It had never been a problem before. By Monday morning, I'd convinced myself that maybe I'd misread the whole thing, that Samantha had just been stressed about something else and taken it out on me. It happened. People weren't perfect. I could let it go. But when I walked into the gallery that morning, Samantha was already there, standing by the front windows with her coffee, and the look on her face told me nothing had been forgotten or forgiven. We need to talk, she said without preamble. My office. Now. My stomach dropped. In 3 years, I'd never heard her use that tone with me. I followed her back, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. She closed the door behind us and turned to face me, her arms crossed, her expression harder than I'd ever seen it. Victoria called me this weekend, she said. She wanted your personal contact information. I didn't give it to her. I know you didn't. But she asked for it, which means you made enough of an impression that she thinks there's something there. Samantha, I swear to you, I didn't do anything to encourage her. She was the one who. It doesn't matter who started it. What matters is that she's a client, and now instead of talking about the commission, she's talking about you. Samantha's voice was tight, controlled in a way that somehow made it worse. I told her you weren't available. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I told her that if she contacted you directly, we wouldn't be able to work with her. I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. You what? I fired her as a client. I told her we couldn't take her commission. The words didn't make sense. I stared at Samantha, at the tension in her shoulders, at the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. But that commission, Samantha, that was going to be huge for the gallery. You've been working on landing her for months. I'm aware. Then why would you? I stopped, my thoughts catching up to my words. You fired her because she was interested in me? I fired her because she was making you uncomfortable and making it impossible to maintain a professional relationship. I wasn't uncomfortable. I was just surprised. And I would have handled it. You didn't need to. I did what I thought was right. Samantha's voice rose slightly, the control slipping. She was inappropriate, and I wasn't going to let her treat one of my employees like that. One of your employees. I heard myself say it, heard the bitterness creeping into my voice. Is that what I am to you? Something flashed across Samantha's face, something that looked almost like pain, but it was gone before I could be sure. What else would you be? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with everything I'd never said, everything I'd carefully kept locked away for 2 years. And suddenly I was so tired of pretending, so tired of wanting her and hiding it and letting that wanting eat away at me in the dark. I don't know, Samantha. You tell me. Because from where I'm standing, you just threw away a major commission because a woman flirted with me, and I'm trying to understand why you do that unless. I trailed off, afraid to finish the sentence, afraid of what it might mean. Unless what? Her voice was quiet now, almost dangerous. Unless it bothered you. Unless you were jealous. The word landed between us like something physical. Samantha's expression shifted, her carefully maintained composure cracking. For a moment, she looked lost, almost frightened, and then her face hardened again. That's ridiculous. I'm your boss, Riley. I was protecting you from an uncomfortable situation, that's all. If you want to read something else into it, that's your problem. My problem. I felt something break inside me, something that had been holding me together for too long. Right. My problem. Just like it's my problem that I've been in love with you for 2 years and you've never noticed because you're too busy being my boss and being straight and being completely unavailable. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the color drain from Samantha's face, watched her mouth open and close without sound. I'd done it now. I'd destroyed everything. The job, the friendship, the careful distance I'd maintained to keep this exact thing from happening. Riley, she started, but I couldn't hear whatever she was going to say. I couldn't stand there and listen to her let me down gently, couldn't bear the pity I was sure I'd see in her eyes. I need to go, I said, already moving toward the door. I need to not be here right now. Riley, wait. But I was already gone, grabbing my bag from the front desk and pushing through the gallery doors into the gray morning, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I walked without direction, letting the city swallow me, letting the noise and movement of hundreds of other people mask the fact that I was falling apart. I'd ruined everything. Everything. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. Samantha texted me once, "Please let me know you're okay." I sent back I'm fine, and nothing else. I wasn't fine. I was the furthest thing from fine. I was 27 years old and I'd just confessed my feelings to my boss, and now I was probably going to have to quit my job and find a new one and start over somewhere else where I wouldn't have to see her every day and remember how completely I'd humiliated myself. On the 3rd day, someone knocked on my apartment door. I almost didn't answer, but the knocking was persistent, and finally I dragged myself off the couch where I'd been living for 72 hours and looked through the peephole. Samantha stood in my hallway, holding a bag from my favorite Thai place and looking tired in a way I'd never seen her look before. I opened the door. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Can I come in?" I stepped back, and she walked past me into my tiny apartment, taking in the mess with a glance, the blankets piled on the couch, the empty coffee mugs, the general air of someone who'd given up on basic functioning. She set the food on my kitchen counter and turned to face me. "You haven't been answering my calls," she said. "I answered your text." "Barely." She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my chest ache. "Riley, we need to talk about what happened." "There's nothing to talk about. I made a fool of myself, and now I'm figuring out how to resign without making it even more awkward than it already is." "You're not resigning. Samantha, I told you I'm in love with you. I can't just come back and pretend that didn't happen." "I know. I don't want you to pretend." She took a breath, and I saw her hands shake slightly before she clasped them together. "I want you to listen to me. Can you do that?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "When I saw Victoria flirting with you, something happened." Something I didn't expect and didn't understand at first. I felt angry, possessive, jealous. All these feelings I had no right to feel because you're right, you're my employee, and I'm your boss, and there are lines we're not supposed to cross. She paused, gathering herself. But the truth is, Riley, I've been crossing those lines in my head for longer than I want to admit. I've been telling myself it was just affection, just caring about someone I work with, just appreciating your talent and your kindness. But when I saw her looking at you like that, when I saw you smile at her, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Samantha. Let me finish. Please. She moved closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that I'd always associated with safety and home. I fired Victoria because I couldn't stand the thought of her touching you. I couldn't stand the thought of anyone having what I wanted. And then when you said what you said, when you told me you loved me, I panicked. Because I'm 15 years older than you, and I'm your boss, and I've never been with a woman before, and I was terrified of all of it. So I hurt you instead. I pushed you away because it felt safer than admitting I wanted you to. The room seemed to tilt. You wanted me? Want. Present tense. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Riley, I have been fighting this for so long. Telling myself it was impossible, that it was wrong, that I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining it. When you walk into the gallery in the morning, my whole day gets better. When you smile at me, I feel it everywhere. When you stayed late that night last month working on the installation and I brought you dinner, and we sat on the floor eating Thai food and talking about nothing, I almost kissed you. I wanted to so badly. But I was afraid. Of what? Of losing you. Of ruining what we had. Of not being enough. She reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek, the touch so gentle it made me want to cry. Of you realizing I'm too old for you, or too set in my ways, or too scared of change. I caught her hand, held it against my face. I don't care how old you are. I don't care about any of that. I just care about you. Even though I hurt you? Even though. I turned my face into her palm, pressing a kiss there, feeling her fingers tremble. Samantha, I've loved you since the day you noticed I'd stopped eating lunch and you brought me soup. Since the day you saw me crying in the bathroom after a bad breakup and you didn't make me talk about it, you just sat with me. Since 1,000 small moments when you showed me who you really are. I don't want perfect. I just want you. She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was kissing me, her hands in my hair, her mouth soft and urgent against mine. I wrapped my arms around her and held on like I'd been wanting to for 2 years, like she might disappear if I let go. She tasted like coffee and hope, and when she pulled back to look at me, her eyes were shining. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I've never felt this way about a woman before. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. She kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, her hands sliding down my back, pulling me closer. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, and she rested her forehead against mine. We have to be careful, she said. At work. We can't let anyone know until we figure out how to handle this properly. The power dynamic, the professional implications. I know. We'll be careful. And we have to take this slow. I need time to process all of this, to understand what it means. Okay. But Riley. She pulled back to look at me, her expression serious. I meant what I said. I want this. I want you. I'm terrified, but I want it anyway. I smiled, feeling something like joy unfurl in my chest for the first time in days. Good. Because I'm not letting you go now. She stayed that night, and we didn't do anything but talk and kiss and hold each other. She told me about her marriage that ended 5 years ago, about how she'd always felt like something was missing but could never name what it was. I told her about my parents who still didn't understand why I couldn't just find a nice girl and settle down, about how I'd always felt like I was waiting for something I couldn't define. And slowly, carefully, we began to build something new between us, something fragile and precious and entirely our own. The next weeks were strange and wonderful and complicated. At work, we were scrupulously professional, careful not to let our feelings show, careful not to touch or look at each other too long. But in the evenings, in my apartment or hers, we explored this new territory together. Samantha was cautious at first, uncertain in her desire, but there was a hunger in her that matched my own. She learned my body slowly, carefully, with the same attention to detail she brought to everything else. And I learned hers, learned what made her gasp, what made her close her eyes and arch into my touch, learned the sound of her saying my name like a prayer. We talked about the future in careful terms. About what it would mean if we stayed together, if this thing between us turned out to be real and lasting. About whether she should step back from being my direct supervisor, about whether I should look for another job eventually. But those conversations felt distant, theoretical. What felt real was her hand in mine, her voice in the dark, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. 3 months in, she told her ex-husband about us. He was surprised but supportive, and she came to me that night crying with relief. I was so afraid he'd judge me, she said. But he just said he was glad I'd figured it out finally. I told my parents the next week. They were less supportive, confused and a little hurt that I'd never mentioned Samantha before, that I'd kept this enormous part of my life hidden from them. But they loved me, and eventually I trusted they'd come around. At work, we maintained our careful distance, but small things shifted. Samantha hired an assistant manager, someone to serve as a buffer between us professionally, to make sure there was no appearance of favoritism. It helped, but it also made me sad sometimes, this reminder that our love had to be hidden, that it complicated things in ways straight couples never had to worry about. But then she'd smile at me across the gallery when no one was looking, or text me something sweet in the middle of the day, and I'd remember why it was worth it.